Welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. Today I am reviewing Red Sister, Book 1 of the Book of the Ancestor by Mark Lawrence. This review will be free of spoilers. But I would like to begin by acknowledging that this book has one of the best, if not the best, opening line I have ever seen in a book. And so I can't resist reading the opening line. I'm sorry if you consider that a spoiler, but it is absolutely genius. Here it goes. It is important, when killing a nun, to ensure that you bring an army of sufficient size. I cannot be the first person to remark on the brilliance of that opening line. I'm sure many other people have made this observation, but I just could not help myself. But this is essentially, Red Sister is Mark Lawrence's spin on the boarding school narrative, transferred to a fantasy setting, in this case, the Convent of Sweet Mercy, which is, the boarding school narrative is conducive to a great read with lots of variety in terms of the classes and the skills to master and various types, in the case of fantasy, of various types of magic to learn, plus the art of combat. And it is a narrative that brings out naturally the protagonist's inner strength. So very conducive to that, as well as the sidekicks or friends, and the rivals are baked into the story, really, in this type of setting. So it's really great stuff. And you also have usually a big foe that is external to the school setting. So that is all part of this type of narrative. It's a familiar one. And the reader learns along with the characters, especially the protagonist going from usually a sort of naive person to a more powerful person. So there is an element of leveling up normally in this type of narrative. And now, just to be clear, I am not comparing Red Sister to Harry Potter. That's probably where a lot of minds went. Harry Potter is far from the first series or story to do this sort of thing, even in a fantasy setting. And more recently, you've also had R.F. Kuang doing it, and you've had Patrick Rothfuss doing it. But one of my favorites is Ursula Le Guin with A Wizard of Earthsea. So, these are settings, these magic school settings that provide various hurdles. And they tend to be very engaging for that reason. And the pacing, not always. I think you can find a variety of pacing in these types of narratives. But in the case of Red Sister, the pacing is excellent. It's a very fast-paced book that somehow also manages to be weighty. So I really appreciated that. Lawrence, in addition to having this school narrative thing going on, he has a dying world setting. So this is part of his spin on this. And the dying world setting really highlights Lawrence's tendency to disregard boundaries between fantasy and science fiction. If you're a reader of The Broken Empire or the Red Queen's War trilogy, you know what I mean. So it is something that works really well in Red Sister. And I had a great time with that, because I think that this is something that is very essential to the tone, to the atmosphere of, so far anyway, Book of the Ancestor, certainly in Red Sister. And I expect it, probably, if anything, as the protagonist ages, things are probably going to get even more desolate and bleak. That would be my guess. But this is the guy, although I would not call Red Sister grimdark by any means, but this is the guy who wrote Broken Empire. So yeah, there's a certain amount of bleakness in Red Sister for sure, which really stems from it being a dying world setting. And I think that Lawrence ingeniously incorporates these science fiction elements into what is really essentially a fantasy. But that is a part of his writing that I recognize from those other two trilogies that I've read, and something that I really appreciate. Another thing that Lawrence does to spice up this story, and it's also something that he does in Broken Empire and in Red Queen's War Trilogy is he plays around with the chronology. He breaks it up, moves pieces, moves things around, and it's not just for kicks. There are reasons for doing this. It's something that I would like to compare to, now this is not fantasy per se, it's sort of Southern Gothic really, but what William Faulkner does in the short story, A Rose for Emily. And it is something that Mark Lawrence really does skillfully, and that is moving the chronology around in order to preserve the mystery and also to increase the suspense and the tension. It is really well executed here, and it is something that is a hallmark of Mark Lawrence's writing, which is yet another reason why I think the pacing of the book is so good, because he has these elements in here that you're waiting to find out, and you're also coming to understand the connections between the various parts of the characters' lives that are presented out of order. And as that happens, things begin to fall into place, and you make sense of certain mysteries in the story. So that is another element that is just absolutely fantastic in Red Sister. And on top of all that, Mark Lawrence writes fantastic characters, in my opinion. I thoroughly enjoyed getting to know Nona Gray, as well as the other characters in this book, in Red Sister, each with their own quirks and their distinctions. These are characters that absolutely pop off the page. I find them engaging. I find them interesting. I find many of them eccentric in the best possible way. And he absolutely makes me love these characters. So absolutely great stuff. I also think he's brilliant at portraying wounded people especially, and evoking not just a fascination with them. This isn't just rubbernecking on the highway to see the accident. What he does is also, very importantly, I think, he builds a sense of connection to these wounded and flawed characters. And that is a very important thing, I think. That is an essential thing for me as a reader, to feel that a story is elevating. And I do think that Lawrence is a brilliant writer who is capable of writing elevating stories that make me think and also entertain me at the same time. And I got all that from Red Sister, which was a huge pleasure to read. I am so glad that I'm beginning another Mark Lawrence trilogy, and I'm really looking forward to continuing in the Book of the Ancestor. That's it from me for now. Until next time.